Director Riddell.
These are just some of my concerns. I didn't want to make it too lengthy because I could have put more, but I feel this is sufficient. And I just want to make a couple of comments to Chief Ferrer before I start, and that's in regards to, I don't know if I made any comments in regards to Redwood City and San Carlos or not. Maybe I did. I'll take your word for it because I don't remember. But the only part I do remember is something in regards to training. I mean, my concern was that having people moving in and out of here, and just because you can transfer somebody here doesn't mean they're trained to the level that we need. And you would be, you know, I'm sure you're aware of that. And that would be true with any agency, not just yours. But that's one of the points I do recall bringing up, that, you know, that training is very important, and just moving bodies in and out, putting somebody, you know, in a driver's seat, yeah, you filled half the bill, but if they're not trained to the level that they need to be at, then, you know, have you really provided, you know, that service? Not really. I mean, you put a body there, but it's limited in its scope and what it can do. And as far as cost for services, my biggest issue, which I didn't address in this, but it's one of the reasons I have a problem with the existing contract, is the same thing with the old contract. You could provide all the services, or none of the services, or anything in between, and we still have to pay you. And that was my problem with the old contract. We were paying for services that we did not receive, that were identified in the contract. And I'm surprised somebody out here in the audience still doesn't have a problem with that. They actually want me to operate under a system that they personally wouldn't operate under, with their own finances. They would not contract with somebody and pay them for services that they didn't receive. But yet you're telling me I have to do that. This is just another example. The same thing with the grand jury report. Personnel can't get accurate information. The information I have is there's been quite a few people that have come through here. Okay, that's one of the reasons I was reluctant to go along with the grand jury rewrite, is because the information I have and the information that's presented, apples and oranges. And that's another problem I have, but I haven't addressed that specifically in here, is trying to get accurate information on what is actually transpiring here. And the other thing is, I inherited this mess when I got on the board. So we spent 7 months trying to clean it up, and we went as far as we could. We couldn't go any further. And it's not because the Management Service Committee stopped and didn't want to proceed any further. CAL FIRE couldn't go any further in the contract on the services that we were requesting them to do. So the new Exhibit E, it is better, but it's still a compromise. Oh, and as far as setting level of service, it's debatable. We have some say on the level of service, but Exhibit E is a perfect example. We spent 7 months trying to bring the service levels up to the same point we had before we contracted with CAL FIRE. We couldn't do it. But that was the goal of the board at the time, is we should have at least the same level of service we had prior to contracting with CAL FIRE. We don't have that. So I'll just read what I have. I know it's going to fall on some deaf ears, but people have keep asking for this like they've never heard it before, and chances are maybe they never have. And one of the reasons is this is going on for a couple. This is probably at least it's more than a year old. It's probably a year and a half old. So if you weren't here a year and a half ago, you probably didn't hear this before. But my goal is to provide the best fire protection services possible, regardless of who provides them. And I've said it in multiple meetings. If we had contracted with Foster City or Menlo Park or anybody else, and they had done to us what CAL FIRE did, I would have a problem with them. So it's not just CAL FIRE. I don't care who it is. If they would have treated this as badly, I would have the same issues with them. Okay, we have a contractor, CAL FIRE, who's failed to meet its obligations in our contract. All the issues listed below were required in the contract. However, CAL FIRE failed to fulfill their contractual obligations. And I put references, Exhibit A and E. I actually copied the contract as exhibits. And the other thing I wanted to bring up before I forget, even in the old contract, we have Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, that we dealt with again at this meeting that Dr. Class was talking about, and it was mentioned that it wasn't CAL FIRE's responsibility. Yeah, it was. It was in the old contract, and it's in the new contract. And that's something else I didn't address. Like I said, there's a list of things I didn't address in this, but I figured I'd hit some of the high points. Okay, CAL FIRE was required to initiate and complete, and I'm taking a lot of this right out of Exhibit E. Within 12 months, the approved training to meet the needs of the community and the terms of the contract. This was the year 2008. In 2010, CAL FIRE advised the board that they had just completed training 18 of 27 personnel in cliff rescue. You can go on the FOG and watch that. This was a presentation given to the board by CAL FIRE. This is 2 years later, though. They were supposed to do this within the first 12 months. This is 2 years later. And 18 of the personnel had just completed the training, and approximately 10 of those personnel were prior Half Bay firefighters who already had the training. So in 2 years, they trained 8 people. And they took the rest of the year to train the additional 9, because I asked them, and you can go watch it on the FOG, how come all 27 aren't trained? What about the other 9? And they didn't know. That was the response. They didn't know why the other 9 weren't trained. You can go watch it on the FOG. Also, personnel working overtime are required to meet the same standard as the personnel signed here. Costs of the contract were based on these services being provided. The contract required all personnel working overtime and assigned to the district to be certified as emergency medical technicians 1, EMT 1 level or higher. I'm taking this right out of the contract. CAL FIRE allowed assigned and overtime personnel to work in a district that were not EMT 1s. Costs of the contract were based on these services being provided. There's no records of any public education or information programs being at any of our schools for the years 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. Not until the new Exhibit E went into effect July of 2011 were any of the classes scheduled. Costs of the contract were based on these services being provided. The contract required engine company pre-plans of commercial occupancy to be done. No pre-plans were completed in years 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. In 2012, the first pre-plans were completed. The costs of the contract were based on these services being provided. Task books were issued in 2008. But there's been little accountability until recently in their implementation. CAL FIRE personnel were required to complete the approved operational task books within 12 months of signing the contract in 2008. Yet it wasn't until the Management Service Committee, 3 members of the board, formed in 2010, that there's been any accountability in its implementation. This negatively impacts the ability of the engine companies to provide the service levels in the contract. And this directly impacts the quality of services the community receives. The costs of the contract were based on these services being provided. Fire prevention. And I know some people don't think much of fire prevention, but it's the backbone of the fire service. It's to stop something from even happening, a potential problem from happening if it does, to mitigate it. Okay, we don't wait until everything just goes, down the toilet and then act. We try to prevent it. That's why it's called fire prevention. Fire prevention is one of the primary responsibilities of the fire service, mitigating risk to prevent a potential problem from developing, and if it does, to lessen its effects. Fire service, by its very nature, has a duty morally and legally to perform that obligation. The California Fire Code, NFPA, Title 19 are just 3 of the codes used to perform this task. In 2008, CAL FIRE completed 142 business inspections out of over 800. In 2009, it dropped to 135 inspections. One shift could have completed 130, 140 inspections. One. Here again, we have the Management Service Committee of the board has to get involved for things to change. CAL FIRE didn't need our input. All they had to do was refer to their obligations in the California Fire Codes. Fire prevention is just another example of failure of CAL FIRE to provide those services in the contract and their responsibilities in the fire codes. Included in the contract was a provision that CAL FIRE performed annual individual and company evaluations. Had they done this portion of the contract been implemented, CAL FIRE would have discovered they weren't meeting the terms of the contract. Local control. The district doesn't have the ultimate say when it comes to cost or service levels. CAL FIRE employees can and have transferred out of the district, and we still have to pay a portion of their salary even though they no longer work for the district. When experienced personnel leave, it negatively impacts the service levels in the contract. Then we start the training process all over again. CAL FIRE can also negatively impact service levels and cost at their own choosing by transferring personnel without board approval or consent of the employee. The board was just advised by CAL FIRE that they were going to transfer a battalion chief with 17 years experience in the district. We were not consulted. The district will be responsible to pay a portion of his salary even though he no longer works for the district. This will also negatively impact the service levels within the community. District needs are subservient to the needs of the state, and this will never change. Now, CAL FIRE has had years to read the contract that they signed. But compliance only came about when the Management Service Committee of the board held CAL FIRE accountable to the contract. There's more, but I think that's sufficient.
Thank you. And Director Riddell is exactly right. When we talk about Exhibit E, what an extremely long process that was. I think it was about 7 months.
Yeah.
Meeting about once a month, going through in detail and improving on what was originally contained as part of our response to the request for proposals in 2006, which was an Exhibit E that gave the board some idea of items that we would provide as part of our service. Because when you get the boilerplate LG1 contract, it doesn't talk anything in there about services. It's very nebulous about fire services and emergency medical services. And we felt it important to come up with a document that included all the other issues, such as the responsibilities of the division chief, the responsibilities of me as the chief of the Coastside Fire District. So in the 2 or 3 years prior to implementing our Service Review Committee and redefining or tightening up all the parameters of Exhibit E, every time that I came before this board on renewing the contract, I advised them, this is the time to add, detract, define, do whatever to Exhibit E. And there was never any additions suggested by the board to Exhibit E. There were comments about cliff rescue. There were comments about water rescue. But I don't recall there ever being a comment on improving shoot times or company officer certification. So I agree, it was a very good process to go through and redefine Exhibit E. When you look at Exhibit E now, I think it's 17 pages. It has a work plan, and in that work plan there are goals. And I'll again be up front, we're not going to meet all the goals that we had listed in Exhibit E. Part of that's my fault, and part of it is this board's fault because of what's occurred in the last 5 months. But I will talk about what CAL FIRE would not agree to at Exhibit E. First, there were shoot times. Some of the members of the committee wanted shoot times, which is the time it takes for a firefighter to hear the alarm in the station, get out of, if it's at night, get out of bed, and if it's at day, get away from whatever project they were doing, get into the engine and push a button. It doesn't mean that the fire engine is moving, it just means that they've made it to the engine to push a button. Shoot times that were requested to be included didn't say that they would have a shoot time of a minute, which I think is the county standard, or 50 seconds. It said that Coastside Fire District will be the top 5, or in the top 5 of all the shoot times in the county. I was not about to subject our employees to a standard that could be impacted by what other agencies are doing. Other agencies decide to go, hey, let's go really fast and run, and we'll get a better shoot time, and then CAL FIRE will have problems in Coastside. So I would not agree to shoot times. I did agree that shoot times should meet the national standard, and that's eventually what ended up in Exhibit E. Second, Exhibit E, there was talk about confined space rescue. And I prepared a staff report just as I had done for the shoot times and presented that to the board in October of 2010, and the board agreed that rather than have our own confined space rescue team specific to the Coastside Fire District, that we would participate in the countywide system and use the confined space rescue teams that were already defined in South San Francisco, Menlo Park,
Central,
and Central County Fire District. And the board agreed to that in 2010. The other issue that I felt was unnecessary was State Fire Marshal's Office Chief Officer Certification for the battalion chiefs and company officer certification by the State Fire Marshal's Office for the fire captains. And the issue wasn't so much that I was opposed to the training, I was opposed to the amount of money and time that it would cost this district to get those to get all of those training classes that would be required for that certification. Even though the State Fire Marshal's Office is part of CAL FIRE, I, as a CAL FIRE unit chief, have no control over when the State Fire Marshal's Office will schedule a class. We still have to pay for the class. We would still have to pay the overtime for someone to cover in behind someone when we went to the class. And at that time, several board members were talking about the amount of training that we were requiring employees to perform. I think I told the board at that time, and I requoted my mentor, Chief Turner, who told us all early on in the game that training is expensive. Good training is very expensive, but we all agree that no training is the most expensive. So in my staff report to the board, I recommended options again in December 2010, and I left it to the board to decide whether that they would go through this effort for company officer certification and chief officer certification. And the board decided, no, we wouldn't do that. So it's not a matter of CAL FIRE disagreeing or hitting a wall on items in Exhibit E that we couldn't accomplish. A common theme in a lot of the discussions here is the cliff rescue. And I believe Director Riddell has brought that up at least 2 to 3 times a year. And it's brought up as a matter of what we used to have prior to CAL FIRE being here and what service we don't have now. There has never been a time in this district the district has been unable to perform a cliff rescue. There hasn't been one. Is that correct? This district has a very special program, and it's a very good program for cliff rescue. Chief Cole is an outstanding instructor. But all that aside, the program that's in this district is not a standardized program. It's not in use statewide. Is it certified?
No.
It's not a certified program because there is no such animal. There is no certified cliff rescue program.
Correct.
Correct. And I apologize
Statewide.
for statewide. And I apologize for deferring to Chief Cole, but he plays an important role in this. So CAL FIRE in this unit, because of the special needs of this district, elected to take this cliff rescue program and apply it unit-wide. So who was it that said that they saw a cliff rescue going on in Pescadero? Raise your hand. Use the same program in Pescadero that we're using here. County Fire, Coastside Fire, all trained to the same level. Can't believe it, I lost my chain of thought. This is somewhat different than the water rescue program that used to be brought up as an issue. In the water rescue program, prior to CAL FIRE's arrival here, this district discontinued the practice of going into the water to rescue employees. I'm going to repeat that. Prior to CAL FIRE being here, it's been brought up several times that that was something we had before CAL FIRE. Yeah, maybe a long time before CAL FIRE, but when we got here, there was no such program. Every attempt that we've tried to make to reinstitute that program has come up with some opposition from some faction. Right now, there is a statewide certified surf rescue program. That program was initiated by CAL FIRE in the San Luis Obispo unit as part of an overall program with other cooperators from other agencies and lifeguard groups that do surf rescues. We, because of the current situation here, have not even attempted to go there because it's a lot of training and it's a high standard to maintain. But I believe in the future, whatever that is, that the cliff rescue program that's in process here is a good program, and eventually with Chief Coles and other assistants, we could possibly make that the statewide standard and get that certified by the State Fire Marshal's Office. We talk about EMTs, and that we failed in the contract to provide EMTs. When I heard that statement, I put the word out. Tell me how many EMTs we have assigned, how many non-EMTs we have assigned to the district. There were no non-EMTs assigned to the district. There were two cases when 2 fire captains did do overtime in the fire district that were not EMTs. guilty as hell. The minute we found out about that, we eliminated them from our rotational overtime list, and they no longer do overtime in the district. It was reported that there were 2 other employees that were both engineers that had been assigned here, but when I confirmed the research this morning on those 2 individual employees, I discovered that one of the engineers has had his EMT certificate since 2003, and the other engineer, who is now a captain, had his EMT certificate in 2001. And I'll agree with Director Riddell, it gets very confusing when you're trying to figure out who has what, because there is a lot of movement of employees. I'll go back to a document that I've provided to this board several months ago on exactly which employees, whether they were transition employees from the Coastside Fire District, and it's 3 pages long, which employees were Coastside Fire District, which employees were CAL FIRE, whoever they were, what their names were, and what months they were assigned to this district. There's the complete list. Director Riddell, you raised up a list at a board meeting about 6 weeks ago that I asked for a copy of. You flung it in front of us, saying there's 100, 125, I don't recall. These are all the people that were assigned to the district. You would not give me a copy of that list. And as I said last week, eventually I was given a copy of a list of employees. I'll find it here. It had maybe 30 names on it. This was the list I was given. On this list is included Chief Cole, because whoever created this list thought that because Chief Cole was a shared employee, that's an indication of CAL FIRE can't retain employees. Also on this list is Chief DeLay, Chief Cosgrave. I can go on. A lot of employees that are still in this district. On this list were employees that were not transitioned employees, but are listed as having gone, but are still here. Also on this list are employees that were never assigned here, that might not have even worked here except for an overtime day. So I would recommend that if you want an accurate list of who was assigned here, go back to the document that I provided to you, I think it's about 6 weeks ago. I also had an explanation on that document of who left, when, and why. And to the question of who transferred, promoted, retired, who transferred in, that was also on this list. The other thing that was on this list was who paid for the training of that employee. And if you go through the documentation that I provided with this list, it will describe to you that in most cases, CAL FIRE paid for that training. Remembering that we don't have the classification of firefighter here, the minimum qualification that we have here, classification in our system, is for an engineer. And to become an engineer, the employee has to have at least had several years of experience, typically with CAL FIRE, unless, of course, they're a veteran, where they do get some preference. But in most cases, the employee has been a firefighter for CAL FIRE for several years. Then CAL FIRE makes the decision to send that employee to our Engineers Academy at CAL FIRE's cost, and then eventually that employee promotes into this district with that training done. So when you go through the list and the memo that I attached to that list, you'll see that. You'll see that CAL FIRE paid for the cost of about 66% of the training required for all the employees that are in this district. Task books. And I don't know if the board members have ever seen the task books that are in use in this district. These task books describe all of the jobs that the chief officers of this district, which would be currently Chief Cole, Chief DeLay, and Chief Cosgrave, determined were important for every employee in this district to know. Those special skills that were required to work in this district. Now, because some of those skills are exactly the same as those in County Fire, they did combine them. But let me take you through the task book, and this is the document that you're talking about, where we certify that that employee is trained and qualified to work in this district. In this task book, there are 14 issues that deal with how to work the radio and look at maps. In this task book, there are 8 items that have to do with working on the aerial, which is parked right here. Very specialized equipment, I agree 100%. That is specific to this district. And for an employee to work in this district, they need to know how to operate that unit. There's only 4 items on how to extricate a patient from a vehicle using some specialized equipment that the district has. There are 18 items on rapid intervention, or RIP, which are exactly the same as that used by the employees of San Mateo County Fire, Foster City Fire, everywhere throughout the county. The RIC is the same. There are 6 items that have to do with breathing apparatus. And I apologize, we use Scots or MSAs here? Scott. So actually there are only 4 items that are specific to the Scott breathing apparatus and several other items that are specific to MSA or mine safety apparatus, which is what we use on the other side of the hill. There are 12 items that have to do with San Mateo County policy. So the employees that work in county fire know those policies just as well as the people here in Coastside. There are 8 items that have to do with tunnel rescue. And let me confirm, the tunnel is an SRA. It's not within Coastside Fire District, but it's within County Fire's jurisdiction. County Fire is also CAL FIRE. I know it gets confusing. My head will be spinning at about 12:30 tonight thinking about what I've just told you, but I think I have it right. So there are 6 items that have to do with tunnels. Then there are 43, the only other 43 items in this task book. This is the entire task book. The only other 43 items have to do with rope rescue. So now we're back to the special rope rescue class. So to say that because an employee hasn't completed their task book and is therefore unfit to work in this district fails to take recognition of all those other common firefighting skills like structural firefighting, vehicle firefighting. And clearly, the chief officers that designed this, chief officers from this district that designed this, must have all the confidence available in those employees already for performing those skills. Commercial inspections. And I'm not going to take any credit for anything that happened in 2008. CAL FIRE was only here for the last half of the year, except for the time that we were at Point Montera. And in Montera, I believe there's a total of 40 commercial occupancies in the Montera area, and the other 760 or so, and I may have the ratio wrong, but clearly the commercial inspections are here. So to say that we only did a certain number in 2008, we weren't even here for half the year. So please give us a little credit for what was accomplished.
I didn't even bring up 2008.
So you did bring up 2009. I agree 100%. I cannot tell you, and perhaps Chief Cole can, why only 135 commercial inspections were done in 2009. And you're exactly right. However, then in 2010, which was a year before the parameters of Exhibit E, that number went from 135 to 388, which then becomes very similar to what was occurring in the district in the years from 2001 to 2008. Then in 2011, also half of that year being prior to our signed agreement on Exhibit E, the number was 554. And this year, prior to June, there was 334, and I'm not exactly sure what the final number on that's going to be. But certainly that was accomplished prior to the understandings that we agreed to in Exhibit E. You talk about the performance of individual employees and us doing performance evaluations. And our chief officers are directed to do evaluations of every employee annually. I don't think they complete 100% of those, but certainly the effort is made to get all of the employees, because that's the direction I give. But I have never been notified by any chief officer in this district through a performance evaluation of an employee who is substandard. Never. Finally, local control. And you're right, the district may not have say in the individual costs of salaries or benefits of employees, but they do have absolute control over the level of service. This, again, I'm not going to talk about the ambulance again, but it was staff it, don't staff it. We responded to your request, so certainly the board does have the right to set that level of service. The board agreed to share the division chief. And then just this past year, the board agreed that instead of sharing the division chief was going to come back to the district. That was my recommendation based on a suggestion made by this board that yes, I was transferring and intend to continue with the process of transferring an employee from the district to another area. The board, in recognition of that, asked for Chief Cole to be back here 100% of the time, and I agreed with the board. The board set the level of service. They may not get to pick the individual employee, and maybe this goes back to Director Alifano's statement about firing me if he could. Hiring is not under the purview of the board.
So wait, real quick on that one. You recommended to the board that you were going to move Assistant Chief Cole here, or we requested that?
Director Alifano, you were at the meeting with Director McIntosh, our union representative, who I thought was here, and myself. And we were discussing this whole issue. And then the discussion settled upon the movement of a battalion chief. And then it was suggested to me that, well, we don't want things to fall through the cracks. Can we have Chief Cole back here 100% of the time? And I said, yes. And then I said to the director, maybe you can bring that up to the board. And the director said to me, it would be better if you recommended that to the board. And I agreed.
That was at our meeting with the regional chief.
No. Sir, I wrote you a letter, an email, immediately after our meeting on the next day that recounted what had occurred and recounted that I would check with the county to make sure they were in agreement with that also.
Thought it was the other one.
No.
My recollection is that it was a surprise to me that you were moving people after we expressed our displeasure in having that happen during this tumultuous time, the contract not being signed. It was also my question to you after you made that recommendation that you were going to make this change. I asked you how much is it going to cost the district to make this move? Because at the same meeting, we had agreed that we were told it was going to be $100,000 to have these consultants tell us what it costs and what it takes to be on our own. And I looked right back at you, and I'll go back and look at the video, and I asked you, what's the exposure, the financial exposure to the district with this change? Something we have no control over. Again, no control over. And I estimated the cost of being over $100,000. And you agreed.
Well, there's two issues, and I know you're going to say I'm confusing the question. You and I talked about moving an employee in January. You and I talked about moving this employee in January.
At the board meeting?
No. In a phone conversation you and I had where we discussed the fact that employees were being told about, are you going to work for CAL FIRE or are you going to work for Coastside Fire? You and I had a conversation about the specific individual. So I told you then that that was probably going to be the result of that. Then at the meeting, the board meeting in May, where this board did not extend or renew the agreement, I had the amount of the cost of moving Chief Cole back here full-time. It was a combination of moving him back here full-time. It was a combination of that and the reduction of the 4 firefighter ones, and I told the board then $60,000 was the net difference.
That's exactly what you said.
At the meeting, I remember that, but I didn't talk to you about moving employees.
Okay, let's,
So
we
let's
can
not
have
go
rebuttal,
there.
we're not
Make accusations.
going back and forth here.
He said he talked to you on the phone.
No, we didn't.
Okay, end of discussion, we're gonna stop
Okay.
right there. Okay, you
Then the
finish
last
what you
issue I
to say.
have is on that reassignment of personnel. And this board needs to consider that the decisions I make as the chief regards individual assignments in this district are meant to benefit this district. In making such decisions, I rely on 42 years of fire department experience, 21 of those as a chief officer, and the last 9 as the unit chief here with 200 employees, 60 additional seasonal employees, 150 volunteers, and 200 felons working up at our camp. But the move of that employee you mentioned in your document is first meant to help him succeed in the fire service and CAL FIRE. But secondly, I believe that the district will benefit by this, by the enhanced experience that the employee will bring back when he returns to this district. And yes, the state will benefit too. And that's all I have.
I got a few comments in regards to your.
Well, we're gonna have a chance to come back and debate or rebuttal later. Okay, so if you make notes
When's
of it,
later?
make notes of it, later tonight.
Next week.
Just a few minutes, but let's get through this systematically or we're not gonna do it. Okay?
Can we take a break?
Yeah, you wanna stand a minute or two? Thank you for the suggestion.
Coffee